you know who wants to hear it, who just missed it. And I'm Tom Wolfe in Western Massachusetts. So let's get rolling with this. Ramy is the chair of the Practice Council, and he's been doing a lot of work, fascinating work in Lebanon for the last couple of years. And let me see if I can find my sheet with his exact title. No, I can't find. He'll give you his exact title. No, here it is. He's the project director at Search for Common Ground, an international organization that focuses on peace building by bringing different groups of people in conflict to work together for a unified solution. And those of us who've heard him talk a little bit before know that his work is fascinating. So I'm just going to turn it over to Ramy, and you'll go for 20 minutes, half an hour, however you please, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. Does that work?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Hi, everybody. As Tom said, I work for Search for Common Ground. It's a peace-building organization. We do conflict transformation, dialogue sessions, and different forms of projects that brings different communities together. My project is in Lebanon, and I just came back from the States around 5 months ago to start up this project. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the project, and I guess from there we can ask questions and see where to go from there. So the project is a strategic communication project, which is divided into 3 different sections. The first section is a conflict and power dynamic analysis that we're doing throughout Lebanon. And the purpose of this is to map out the stakeholders, map out the conflicts, and see in different communities the different issues that are happening and with the different stakeholders. From there, we based on the research that we've done with the conflict analysis, we base our next section of the project, which is working with champions, which are influencers within their own communities. We worked with the champions, we allocate the champions based on this conflict analysis in different communities across of Lebanon. These champions are gonna be trained in something we call the common ground approach, and I'm gonna explain the common ground approach in a bit. And once they are trained in the common ground approach, we also give them facilitation, dialogue facilitation training, as well as, project management training, and social media presentation kind of training, storytelling, and how to present themselves online. From there, once they give them those training, we're hiring right now in the process of hiring 6 coaches, mentors, and those champions are going to be working with those mentors related to the facilitation of those dialogue sessions, as well as implementing a project later on. So the champions, as I said, they're going to be facilitating 10 different dialogue sessions within their own communities. They're going to recruit 10 members in their communities that are regularly going to follow up in those sessions and be part of those sessions. And they're going to follow through 11 different themes that we have in the common ground approach. A little bit about the common ground approach. It's like a peace building, non-violence kind of action kind of approach that Search for Common Ground have developed. And it focuses on 11 modules. The first one is about identity. The second one about adversarial versus collaborative kind of approaches. Then defining conflict and violence, the visible and invisible dynamics of conflict, responding to conflict, active listening, empathy and empathy blockers, perspective and perceptions, conflict analysis, building common ground, and honoring dignity. So those are the 11 modules that we usually work through, and the champions in their own sessions are going to go through each one of those modules, but implement them based on their own local needs, gaps, and realities. So they're going to adjust them to base whatever, let's say there's a conflict in their community, they're going to base it on that, not just like not the 24, like we have 24 champions and 24 areas, and each one of them is going to be different from the other. Once they go through those sessions, the coaches are going to be helping them to set agendas and prepare them, and training them and mentoring them in whatever needs they need to ensure that they're completing these sessions successfully. In addition, they do the agendas and preparation and all that. They debrief after these sessions with the coaches to make sure that everything went well and to prepare for the next sessions. Once these dialogue sessions end and finish, then they have to prepare and work together. As I mentioned, one of the last modules or themes are actually about conflict analysis, building common ground approach. So those two, especially those two, they're gonna map the conflict in their own communities. In addition to generally talk a little bit about the whole aspect of the conflict in Lebanon, and then move forward to create a project, a community-led initiative to implement within their own communities. Pardon me. So we're gonna be giving them mini grants, like mini funds of 2,000 to 3,000 USD to implement within their own community with those 10 members. They're gonna plan for them. They're gonna prepare for it as they're applying for a regular grant, write a proposal, write a budget, and then send it to us for approval or rejection. So we can give them this opportunity to learn and to improve upon their proposals. If the proposal was rejected, it will be rejected so they can work on it more, and then we'll approve it later on as they develop it further, because we want all the 24 champions to implement these projects. So that's from the implementation kind of perspective. In addition to that, we have a national media campaign in parallel to all that, which it's gonna follow through with the dialogue, follow through with those initiatives being planned, as well as creating initiatives and, a media campaign targeting people to reduce hate speech, to reduce prejudice, and to create a culture of collaboration and working together. That's generally the project. It's right now in the research phase of it. It's a 2.5-year project, and we're just starting up, I guess. Yeah. Is there any question, or would like me to talk about something more? Please let me know.
Ramy, could you give an example of what one of the projects is that one of your community participants is working on?
Yeah, of course. So right now, the projects are going to be something small, working within their own communities. And those projects are usually participatory. So we're not giving them any kind of sets of rules of choosing a project. What we're asking from the participants, from the champions, is for that project to bring people within their own community that, let's say, Syrian refugees and Lebanese host communities. We would love to see if there's some kind of conflict in those communities, to bring these two groups together so they can have, let's say, a form of dialogue. They can have a festival together that brings them together, our art exhibition, food cook-off, and challenges with each other, let's say bringing Syrian food and Lebanese food, although we have the same food, but each one of us do it a little bit differently. So have a little bit of cook-off, creating a culture kind of theme, an art kind of theme, or whatever the champions find that necessary. Sometimes it can be actually recycling, creating a recycling kind of plan for their own town, and the town would work together with each other on that kind of goal. So we're not setting something in stone, that's how the project it should be. We're just giving them the freedom so they can brainstorm with their own 10 community members about what exactly they want. Do I answer you, Jean?
Yes. So it sounds like you're still you've identified your champions, but they have not yet identified a project. Is that correct?
Yes, because they have to go through the 6 dialogue sessions before starting to identify the project.
So they don't have their teams identified yet either.
No, they haven't. Right now, we're going through the research project and the training process.
Okay.
So they're gonna go through the training in January, end of January.
Mm-hmm.
So they haven't done that yet.
And how did you select the champions?
The champions, we used 3 methods. The first is through the conflict analysis. Researchers already went to the fields, met with a lot of people, surveyed them. So we did surveys, key informant interviews, and focus groups. So through these three, they asked for recommendation within, let's say, if they met with a municipality, they asked the municipality, local government in Lebanon to recommend someone. In addition to that, We did also online recruitment, as well as recommendation from our partners in the field that we've worked with in the past, and if they find anyone that they can recommend. So we interview each of the champions and we move forward with them. The position of that is capacity development for like each of those champions, and it's a voluntary kind of position, but in the same time, we're paying them a stipend around $300 a month, so they can have something for expenditures if they need it, for in case they needed it, for example, for phone calls, or they needed something for private. We're giving it to them as long as they secure a location to have the meetings in, and the materials needed, and some refreshment for the participants within them. The rest they can keep for themselves. We don't have any restrictions on that, but in the same time, we want them to have that kind of, I'm gonna say, hustle to find the best deal so they can use it and ensure that there's satisfaction. Meanwhile, we're making sure that we're following up on that to ensure that they're following up on certain guidelines concerning how and what the place needs to be in, concerning like slideshow and like flip charts and all that, to ensure that all the places are like, the accommodations are actually, there is heating in case there's cold, not just like going anywhere else. And we're doing that through the coaches, as well as our project officers following up on that stuff. At the same time, we're creating a coach manual and like champion manual with the guidelines of each thing, that what we're expecting, what they can expect of us, and to follow up on that.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's quite interesting because right now in Lebanon, we're going through like a lot of demonstrations. We're going through a lot of economic crisis. So we had to readjust a lot of the things that were originally proposed for like the grant that we asked for from the donor. So there's a lot of gray right now, although each time we're adjusting, but it's an interesting process to see how the project is moving along with all these things are happening.
So what kind of a donor supports such a huge undertaking?
Usually embassies, and like the EU, British Embassy, American embassies, like US Department, for example, US Aid, British Aid, Canadian, like also like the Italians. So usually are either European or like from North America.
Got it. And have you done this before, or are you sort of learning as you go?
Yeah, I've done this kind of line of work. So before moving to this, like going to the States for my education, that's what I was doing before.
With all these stages, the training, the champions, the mentors, because
Yeah.
it's very comprehensive. I mean, you're really covering all the bases, which is impressive.
Yeah, like before we've done that with the youth, for example, and we created a project where Syrian youth and Lebanese youth, like Syrian refugees and Lebanese youth, went for a 1-week camp with each other. And together they went through different kind of trainings. And we created this 1 week because we wanted them to be isolated from the outside so they can create this kind of bond, relationships, and this trust with each other. So the objective of it is for them to come and learn different forms of art. One is being music, whether singing or learning an instrument. 2 is drawing, so they can create like their own, comic book. 3 is theater. They went through all the theater stages. And 4 was film and editing. So they can do their own short films. And throughout this week, also, they went through life skills, which were like things related to leadership, perspective, things related to the common ground approach, and how to view each other as human beings instead of these categories that we limit ourselves, that are often racist and full of bigotry. And yeah. But anyway, after this week, they went through for a year where they worked with each other and they created different forms through these arts, like a song together. They created, whether it was, some of them created song like rap, they rapped. Some of them created like more traditional songs in relation, like classical kind of rock or even Arabic kind of songs. And then the theater, they created the play. The drawing, they created the comic book, and the film, they created short films, all related to peace building, conflict transformation, and acceptance, and collaborating with each other. And they went through their own communities and they presented that stuff through their own communities. So we're constantly doing that kind of work using multiple tools to be able to reach out a wider range of people and not just like the smaller communities.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Ramy, this is Nicole. Do you have any problems with attrition when it comes to the champions or even their teams? And how do you manage that attrition if it's an issue?
What does attrition mean?
Attrition, so a champion who's no longer able to be a champion for whatever reason. Either they elect to stop doing that work or they are somehow otherwise not able to complete the task that they've been set.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Yes, so we always do actually, and usually if they're unable to, we try to work with them. Either it was because of personal reasons or because of the reality of the situation. A lot of Syrian refugees often cannot move around in Lebanon because of the unfortunate like racist rules that we have in Lebanon concerning that, depending on the town. So we definitely always try to find a way to help them to get to point A to point B if it was that kind of situation. But in the same time, sometimes they're unable to come because they have to work and all that. Although we try to work with them, they stop coming. What we try to do is to keep touch with them. The people that they worked with, like let's say the other champions or the other youth, they try to keep in touch with them and work with them. We don't usually recruit someone if, like, let's say one person left, we don't recruit someone to replace them because everybody went through like a process and we cannot bring them without because they haven't been in that process, unfortunately, to build the trust, to build that kind of community and to build all that.
Ramy, this is David. Can you talk a little bit about strategies to measure impact given the multiple approaches you guys are using in terms of spreading the message?
So usually strategies, unfortunately, monitoring and evaluation does not go longer than 2 years or 3 years tops. And we've been having really problem with that due to like funding, like always. So the strategy that we follow through is like pre and post test, as well as always monitoring and writing reporting situation and having like qualitative kind of filming one, like the students, like the champions, were always interviewing them and asking them about what they see the process going. But once the project ends, unfortunately, we haven't been able to successfully find a way to like measure that afterward. So we don't have long-term measurements. From my own personal like experience and professional experience, of course, unfortunately, once these projects end, because it's not implemented from a wider systematical kind of perspective, those youth or champions, although they continue having these kind of, let's say, common ground approach guidelines and like principles with them, but the wider society around them does not. So we're impacting certain individuals and sometimes certain communities for a certain period of time, pardon me. But once the, let's say, xenophobic kind of language or sectarian and racist language has risen up again, you started seeing all the work like that you've done, not like being diminished to zero, but drastically being diminished because of the reality, the political reality, especially that in Lebanon, we're a sectarian culture and we're like, so our democratic system is based on sectarian representation. So let's say a person is Muslim Sunni or Muslim Shia, they each have representation, or Christian Maronite or Christian Orthodox, they each have representation. So in comparison to the US, it's like Latinos, African American, and white American having that kind of representation. In Lebanon, we have that from that kind of sense. So in addition to that, you have the refugees in Lebanon. You have different forms of refugees in Lebanon. You have the Palestinian refugees, the 48 and the 67 refugees, which right now they're considered one, but before in the past they weren't, they were treated differently. And then you have the Syrian refugees and the Iraqi refugees, they each are treated differently too. And then you have the Armenian refugees that they became citizens while the others did not become citizens because of geopolitical reasons and because the Armenians came to Lebanon before Lebanon was created as a state. So that being said, we have so many like things being in this whole like mixture of stuff. But in the same time, although we try to work in different things, we're unable to truly measure the impact that we've had on a bigger society because of funding. And then all the work that we've done because of this mixture of things is often difficult. Like, let's say we worked on something and we thought that, okay, we're doing progress and something else come. And because of the multitude of layers and layers and layers and layers, it makes it even more difficult to deal with it. Because again, unfortunately, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and nonprofits do not deal on a long-term strategies kind of forms. They often deal with like shorter term. How we try to counter that is to create, like, let's say from within our own organization, although we have project funding for 1 year or 2 years, create a wider program strategy that focus on certain topics that we can follow up on. We haven't been able to fully successfully do that, but it's a work in progress, I guess. Do I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think a follow-up then, especially because of your funding limitations, are there ways of finding opportunities to make this sustainable, independent of your funding streams, essentially kind of keeping this project going, or these projects going?
Like usually diversifying funding is the best way. That's the limitation of being grant driven and restricted funding driven. Usually like organization, like other organization, not like Social Common Ground, they were able to overcome that. Like for example, Greenpeace, they have their own form of funding. They go down to the streets and they raise funding. Then they have major gifts also, and they have multiple forms of diversifying their funding. Once like an organization is able to do that, which you need like a whole development team to be able to do that, then you'll be able to actually do things on a longer term. Certain organizations have been able to, but unfortunately, most of them, they haven't.
And
I guess,
Ramy, this,
sorry, yeah, I don't need to dominate this, so go ahead.
yeah, so this is Vernita, and my thought, you know, I'm kind of piggybacking on to what David was saying. My thought was about, you know, the follow-up and what results you see. So I'm thinking if the embassies are not going to set up a continual funding, then is it possible to make connections with social scientists around the globe? Because like myself, I'm an interdisciplinary social scientist, and so I'm interested in peace building, and I'm interested in decolonization and all the ways that we can find to collaborate and to really restructure a new type of society that really works for everyone. And so could it be beneficial to reach out so that scientists like myself, we can do follow-up research in these communities to see what the trust levels are after, like, for example, with the youth, when they met for the week and then the year after, to do some type of studies or surveys afterwards to find out if they did have a shift in their racial view, their ethnic view, their trust in the other. And possibly, because I think through those networks and those connections, there can be additional funding, there can be scientific groups that actually want to see results in different types of communities. Like you mentioned, the racial stratification here in the US. So is that something that's possible?
I say it depends on the organization, but it's definitely possible. And there's a few times that I met people that try to do that. I'm not sure about how long it continued, but they definitely like try to communicate to like social scientists and to further develop. And that's where like my issue with like NGOs and nonprofits in general often comes in, is concerning the topic of decolonizing like a society. Often, unfortunately, not all of them, of course, often like those organizations, instead of working from a truly systematic perspective of decolonizing, they're often working with the status quo rather than for, let's say, the people that have been oppressed and marginalized over the time from a systematic kind of perspective. From a, let's say, one-on-one kind of perspective, working them, they're trying to help, but systematically at the end of the day, if the nation, the government itself is not working on that topic, then there's little effect to actually be able to help out. Let's say like my budget is coming from the British Embassy or the US Embassy, which both of them are trying, let's say, to talk about social stability and try to help reduce racism and all that. But at the end of the day, these same organization, the same, like, let's say, institution, whether it was the embassy or their own government, they're also funding different form of wars in the region. So they're recreating this oppression in so many different ways. And they're always coming with like a set of rules and agenda and all those like mainstreaming words each time to create like this whole new process. So although NGOs and nonprofits are helping, but I feel that they're still stuck in this loop between wanting to help and not knowing how to help, and also being restricted with the funding. So let's say if they did move forward with talking to a social scientist, some of them would want to go with that, but most of them, unfortunately, so we have a thing of reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, because everybody wants to be the one with the idea of saving the world, or like they're so protective of their idea and they don't want to share it with someone else. So although I say yes, it is possible in certain instances, but unfortunately, generally speaking, I haven't seen that happen. And that's where my frustration actually comes with working with NGOs or like nonprofit. And I always rethink my role in that. Although I love what I do, don't get me wrong. And I think with the limitation that we're doing a great job because of the realities that we have. But in the same time, on the long run, I would like to see more work concerning social justice and decolonization and dismantling oppressive system, because that's the only way, unfortunately, in my opinion, to be able to truly move away from it. So if we're a peace building organization, for example, and we're working with local communities, but we're not working with like the US, actively working with the US as a major power, or working with like the UK as a major power to change their own habits of oppression and wars and like geopolitics, then what's the point of doing what we're doing? And that's the question
So I want to,
yeah.
And I want to just like add on to this by just saying that I've worked in private sector for quite a while. So I actually work with the people that you're talking about who are on the front side, you know, as a facade, they're saying, yes, we want peace building and we want to support these things. And behind the scenes, like you said, they're doing everything to counter that. So my suggestion is to look at agendas, because that's how I started really working to make change, was to look at what the real core agenda is. And as we know with the embassies, if they're working on peace building, then they have a stake in that area. But that's why I was saying, looking at social issues, social scientists who are wanting to change the issue without an agenda, that the only agenda is to make a better world. And I think that I see growing groups of organizations that are around the US and some places in Europe that are working on creating that, and they don't have, it's unconditional, they don't have an agenda except to see us getting along, because we know that that's going to shift the way our civilization has, you know, works. So I would actually like to stay in touch with you and talk further about this like offline, because I don't want to take the whole meeting here, but just to consider that, because I think there's a way to really create a stream where you have consistent funding and consistent support. Because once you make these huge strides, like you said, if it falls off, then it's an exhausting effort. And I think there's a way for this to really work. So, and thank you for doing this today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. And like, yeah, definitely there's a lot of organizations, including Search for Common Ground, for example, that are having that kind of conversations. And I really hope that they're going to be able to overcome all those. I'm not sure when. Unfortunately, that's the reality, that's a systematic reality that they are stuck in right now. But I really hope that they're going to be able to overcome them, because there's a lot of well-meaning and like hardworking people that, as you said, they're always trying, but it becomes really tiring and really like exhausting at times to be able to just find a way outside of it. Or yeah, I don't know, I hope so. But yeah, I would love to stay in touch. Anyone
Hi,
else?
Ramy. This is Emma. Thank you very much for your work. This is fascinating to hear. So I just wanted to follow up with a few process ideas, or wanted to get your feedback on Nicole's idea of the attrition. I just wondered if it makes sense in your experience to have a buddy system with the coaches. So, you know, if we're worried that maybe one of them may fall off, that if there's two of them coming in from the get-go, that at least there's support for each other, but there's also an allowance for people to skip out if they need to for any reason. Would that be too much strain on the funding that you have, or is that something that you think might work?
So when you mean by skip out, like you mean leave the project or just take a time to rest?
Well, both. I mean, it could be that someone just cannot continue the project anymore, or it could be that I just can't be there for that one day and we're going to have a meeting and someone needs to take notes and facilitate. And so it would just, I wonder whether that might work. I mean, when I've worked in group facilitation before, we've always had two people working together just so that there's support within that process. And if anything happens, you know, that there's another person to rely on.
Yeah, so there's 6 people, 6 coaches, mentors in the group. And the amount of hours that we ask them to like commit to us are 10 to 20 hours a month at the most, usually closer to 10 hours. And what we do is we each give them like four champions each. And in case one of the coaches were not able to, they're going to be part of a group, like a WhatsApp group, which we can message. And in case they weren't able to, we can definitely put, like they can rest. And in case they wanted to leave, they're going to be able to leave. And other coaches can come and take over them. Does it answer your question, Emma?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Emma, were you asking about
Sorry,
the
go ahead,
coaches or the champions?
Well, so maybe I missed that point. I thought maybe the coaches and the champions were the same thing, but now I understand there's one coach and 4 champions assigned to that coach.
Yeah, and it sounded like what you were talking about is really relevant for getting the champions themselves to support each other, because the other one's most likely to drop out.
Maybe, yeah. But even the coaches, I mean, I've worked with people with PhDs that something just comes up, you know, that, you know, they have a family crisis. I don't know, just something happens where if it's one person holding the bag at the top, the rest of the dialogue or, you know, facilitation process is at risk, you know, for dying.
Yep.
And I have another question to follow up on David's point. So the strategy to measure impact, I just wonder how social media is in the regions that you're working in, and whether that's, I've never used it before. I've often proposed it with my people that I work with, but they've always been resistant because they don't want to use social media. But if we could track the process of the project on social media, so there's a long history online that people can come in and come out, but then it also, you know, maybe a nice way for people to have kind of like succession planning. I don't know if you've used that or if you think that might be a good idea.
So we do have actually a media monitoring officer, and they're like monitoring the media, but more related to tension and how things have changed and the language that the media is using, or in like social media also. In Lebanon, most of the news being shared actually is through WhatsApp, and then through Facebook. And WhatsApp is really difficult to monitor to see what the kind of information are being shared. And because like the project is not really visible, because so if we're doing the media campaigns, we can follow up on that. but it's gonna be difficult to follow up on the impact of those people afterward because of the funding. So we can do that throughout the 2.5 years that we're in, but later on, it's a bit difficult. I'm not sure, like, yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering if you have a Facebook or something, a place where it's, you know, some private, some public, whatever you need to do. But then if you have a history that people can come in, like social scientists can come in after the project and then take over to just track. I mean, I'm just thinking about my students. They use it all the time, not Facebook per se, but that they could come in and then just track what's going on in those groups. Not to be like an outsider watcher, but to be a participant observer with whatever project this community started and or continues.
So for the community, we're definitely, it's easier for us, so concerning the dialogue. However, I'm talking more from a national media campaign kind of level. I was talking about.
Right.
But from the dialogue, we're definitely following up through WhatsApp, through Facebook, and with the champions constantly, which they're reporting back to us concerning their updates and what's happening within their own communities. So they're doing their own monitoring within their own communities and then reporting back to us too.
But then those Facebook, after the 2 years, it just ends? Like no one continues to post things, or how does that go?
We try to like work with the champions for them to do so, but often, unfortunately, it dies off. There's definitely no long-term contingency plan, like long-term kind of planning for this, unfortunately.
So Emma and Ramy, I think there's some open source opportunities. I'll again, Ramy, since I want to stay in touch with you, I'll look into it. But there's open source opportunities where that information could be stored, and it's servers that are already set up, and then you have the ability to protect it because it's for scientific research, as opposed to Facebook, because Facebook has those issues where there's ownership. Anything that's free, then the source of the service owns the property. So I think an open source option might be available where they could still have protections, and then they could also possibly still be willing to do some of the open source journals where they report the information and provide, opportunities for scientists to join in. It's just a thought.
It seems, this is Tom, it seems to me that one of the questions being raised is when the 2 or 2.5 years is over, is there a position where the trained champions could continue to operate? Is there some legitimacy for that? Is there any incentive because they've been paid $300 a month, that drops off? What would, keep anything going that you could even think about evaluating? Because, we're so used to this in the US too. You do grant projects, the grant money comes to an end, and everybody runs off to figure out what next grant they're going to work on. So how do you sustain that interest enough for them to report back to you what they might be doing?
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Honestly, I really don't know. We're trying to find ways concerning the open source that Vernita mentioned, the information that they share concerning monitoring, we don't share on Facebook. We share either through reportings or WhatsApp in case there's high monitoring kind of tension situation happening. But usually we report and we monitor through that kind of conversation on the phone. Other than the long term, honestly, to find them an incentive, it's difficult. I think it's the organization responsibility to find a way and to find the funding for the longer term, especially if it's a big organization and they're able to, because unfortunately, most of the nonprofits and NGOs, they're small organization. They're not mid organization. They're not big organization. Most of them are small. So they don't have the funding and they don't have the human capacity to do so. In our case, we're definitely a bigger organization. And I think it's our duties, whichever NGO it was, it's their duty to actually find a way, the funding to ensure that there's long-term funding to follow up on that, which it's not happening. Concerning open source, I've never tried it, honestly Vernita before, and we'll definitely check it out.
Ramy, this is David again. Kind of given the approach and the methodology, you would think that there would be some intrinsic value independent of funding for folks that want to see this continue. Have you tried to assess any of that?
Can you please repeat the question, David?
So kind of given the approach that you take, you know, you're getting, if you want to say, key informants, you're doing all these surveys, and you're essentially working with people to determine what these strategies could potentially be around the work in question. You would think that with folks taking some ownership of kind of this work, that there would be an intrinsic value as opposed to kind of like, well, I'm getting some reward or some monetary value for engaging in this process, that once that ends, that I'm going to keep it going because I believe in the mission or in the purpose of this project.
So usually those that continue, like for example, the project that I mentioned concerning the youth learning arts, they actually continue that work until this day. And I can see them on Facebook and YouTube doing videos, whether it was humorous or it was serious. They're still doing, let's say, videos or music, like creating songs and rapping and all that about social issues. So a lot of them continue that kind of work, but there's no one like following up from like an organizational kind of perspective on like to monitor that and evaluate it for the long term to see the impact of it.
Okay.
Well, you know, Ramy, I worked in a project in Wisconsin where we every year did a training of leaders, Healthy Wisconsin Leadership Institute. And they had the same problem. They would train a team for a year and then they lost them. And what they did is they created a sort of a coach's follow-up year with those who wanted to would stay connected. And so it sounds like you have people continuing the work, and it might be interesting to be able to offer them for a minimum amount of resources, some mentoring that would keep you in touch with them to both figure out what they're doing and figure out whether there's some way to evaluate it. Because I think she's right that there is intrinsic interest in this once you get people engaged.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I can give you the details on it if you want.
I'll definitely follow up on that, like after this. Like for me, honestly, like I consider myself a multidisciplinary kind of person, and that's why I enjoy the project that I'm in. But I'm always like feel unfortunately disappointed with the fields, whether it was academia, whether it was like the practical side of things through NGOs or nonprofits, because there's always a lack in all those kind of stuff. So I'm always wondering how to overcome those, or if I'm in the right field. It's unfair to say that they're not doing the work is needed, whether it was in academia or it was like the practice side of it. But in the same time, there's definitely seem like a lack, generally speaking, with most NGOs, a lack in long-term planning to make sure that those oppressions, those oppressive systems, or like to do like a true decolonial kind of process of moving from point A to point Z, it's like always lacking. And often, unfortunately, in most NGOs, it feels like ego comes in the way of everything. So they're just, although there's a lot of good, like really good people really trying to do the work, but in the same time, they're like, it depends on the person, it depends on the organization. If let's say the founder of organization founded this organization like 80 years ago, and for 80 years, this organization have been stuck in some way just because they didn't want to change that founder, then you often find like after 80 years, this organization itself have a lot of the characteristics of that founder. So although it's like one person, but it's impacting the whole organization. And you see it like being impacted within the communities, you see it being impacted within the agendas that being put place or the long-term strategies. So I think if we're gonna find a solution, it needs to be always like a bunch of NGOs or nonprofits or a bunch of people within, like, let's say the government sitting down and talking about it from a holistic kind of perspective, rather than just talking, like funding this small project about gender equality, for example. Gender equality is really important, but these projects are not really making big progress as we want them to do. Those projects are needed because there's lack of, pardon me, of gender equality or even equity, but in the same time, they're not doing the major like difference that they need to do. Because once those funding end, then everything ends with it. If it was for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but then after that, like what I often saw, unfortunately, there's no continuity, no matter what, let's say, trying to strategize for the long term and like trying to motivate those champions that we're working with or those communities. But if like a person is hungry, if a person is living in a justice like place, they often have to find a way to survive. And that's the primary things that we often do. We go back to our survival mode. So we talk about the needs with those folks, let's say both the physical needs of eating, security and all that, but also the relational needs, emotional needs of feeling accepted, respected, appreciated, and all those. But often, if we don't have the right environment, we're gonna fall to the survival needs. So yeah, I don't mean to end it with a pessimistic kind of message. It's just, I believe that we're definitely trying to get to the point, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I'm hoping like us as community psychologists that we can definitely work on that and further develop it, I guess. Yeah.
Ramy, do you know of
yeah.
anybody that's doing that work at all now, working to talk to NGO leaders or trying to organize maybe coalitions at that level?
Usually environmental organizations are like the best at doing that. Other than like organization, like the UNDP, United Nations Development and Planning, I guess, in progress, but they do some kind of grouping of different NGOs, but I don't see much of an impact because often the UN agencies are political agencies because of the nature of the UN in general. So they have their limitations.
It sounds to me what you're looking for are NGOs who would be committed to significant social and cultural change. And in the US, it's really hard to find groups. I mean, I can't speak for, but it sounds like the same thing in Lebanon, that you find groups who are willing to remediate the difficult circumstances of people. But if you say, I'm going to commit myself, my organization, to gender equality, then a lot of the organizations are going to run for the hills.
Yeah. And like economic also justice, because
right.
Like one thing, like one last note, like before we leave, because it's almost time, I guess, like one thing a previous director that I worked with, he tried to mention concerning conflict, let's say, or like dealing with like reducing prejudice as it's not economic and we have to work with the people. Yes, I agree. It's much more deeper. There's definitely a lot of rooted concerning a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. But at the same time, the economy, if the economy is not there to feed those people and to make them feel comfortable, how can they improve? Because all they're thinking about is to survive. So unless we create the right conditions, unfortunately, the social and change that we want to see won't be as successful as creating the condition that needs to be created.
Ramy, I want to thank you enormously. This has been fascinating, and just judging from the questions and interest of the people and the number of people on the call, that's also true for them. We're going to end in a minute or two. Because we have a larger attendance than usual, I'd love anybody who would know of someone who could also do a presentation like Ramy has done to send me the name or recruit for me, and we'll be glad to schedule them. Susan is going to do one of the next ones.